Hey everybody, Charlie Specht here, live in the First Ward in downtown Buffalo, and just ended a news conference by Assembly member Patrick Burke, who is calling on the New York State Police to launch a comprehensive criminal investigation into the Diocese of Buffalo. This coming, of course, after the recent federal arrest of Diocese of Buffalo priest Jeffrey Nowak on charges of receiving child pornography. And Assemblyman Burke here saying that I'm going to just quote him here after he says, after decades of allegations, hundreds of civil lawsuits, bankruptcy proceedings, and the diocese's own acknowledgement that dozens of priests were credibly accused of abusing children, Father Jeffrey Nowak's arrest is the first criminal prosecution to emerge from this scandal. That should concern every one of us, Burke says. So Burke, if you remember, was the first assembly member who called for Bishop Malone's resignation in 2019. He was the first of many politicians, then Congressman Brian Higgins and South District Councilman Chris Scanlon, also among those who called for Malone to step down. Malone eventually did step down after my reporting on Father Jeffrey Nowak. So just to refresh everyone's memory, in 2019, Father Jeffrey Nowak was called a sick puppy by Bishop Malone for his alleged sexual harassment of a Christ the King seminarian, who essentially alleging that Nowak came on to him sexually and may have done other things such as violating the seal of confession, which is punishable by excommunication in the Catholic Church. However, Nowak was put on administrative leave in 2019, and nothing was, as far as we know, ever done. I've been asking the diocese, what did they do? Did they do an investigation back then? What were the results? Was he charged canonically in the Diocese of Buffalo's own canon law system with anything? Again, diocese spokesman Greg Tucker, mum on that. One thing we do know, that Nowak was being paid by the Diocese of Buffalo. That's right. If you're Catholic, you're putting money in the collection basket every week. You were unknowingly contributing to a Diocese of Buffalo priest's either meth habit or child pornography habit. That's something that has been really disturbing to a lot of Catholics. Those I've spoken with, those who have been commenting on the diocese Facebook page and social media channels, people are really upset here that their money was apparently being used to fund this. And Burke says that it's indicative of a larger problem. I'm going to go back to his statement on here. He says that despite Bishop Malone calling Nowak a sick puppy in 2019 and also dangerous, Nowak remained on the payroll and lived in diocesan housing for different periods of time before his arrest. Now, Burke argues the Diocese of Buffalo represents precisely the type of investigation that requires the resources and expertise of the New York State Police. Now, he's asking the state police, one second here, to open a comprehensive criminal investigation into the Diocese of Buffalo. He's asking them to coordinate state and local investigations to ensure every credible lead is pursued. He's asking them to serve as a primary liaison with federal authorities to eliminate jurisdictional gaps. And he's asking them to consider establishing a specialized state police investigative unit dedicated to institutional child sexual abuse and organized efforts to conceal it. Now, he cited the balkanized investigative process that often, happens here with multi-jurisdictional crimes. He mentioned that task forces that are often made to overcome those. If you can remember, the bike path rapist task force wasn't solved until there was an overarching task force, and he wants the state police to essentially create a similar task force to get rid of these jurisdictional gaps. He called it a balkanized investigative process. Now, the feds are doing their own thing with the child pornography, obviously, but as I mentioned during the news conference, and I asked Burke, I said, look, there's 900 claims of child sexual abuse in bankruptcy court. This is the first criminal proceeding. Why is that? I'm working on a book right now that one of the chapters gets into the incredible deference that the Diocese of Buffalo received from law enforcement in Western New York. We're talking about the Erie County District Attorney's Office. We're talking about the Buffalo Police Department for decades having a no arrest policy when it comes to Catholic priests. That's been reported by the Buffalo News. We're talking about essentially as long as criminal defense attorney Terry Connors has been the diocese attorney, the Diocese of Buffalo essentially being a no-fly zone for the Erie County District Attorney's Office. Burke is saying enough of that, and Burke is saying the state police, with its resources, needs to come in and do a criminal investigation of the Buffalo Diocese. Now, this is not something that is unprecedented. If you look south to Louisiana, New Orleans, in particular, New Orleans, a lot of similarities between the two scandals here in New Orleans and Buffalo, heavily Catholic area where institutions, in many cases, protected the church. The Louisiana State Police were crucial to criminal investigations in that state, and they've gone in and arrested priests. They've gone in and tried to charge those responsible. One of the things I asked Burke was oftentimes lawmen usually say, well, the crimes are outside of the statute of limitations now, unfortunately, because a lot of these crimes happened decades ago. Okay, what I asked him was, what about the administrators? What about the people in charge of the diocese? What about people like Richard Malone, Edward Grosh, now Michael Fisher, Peter Corrales, anyone, Jim Croglio, anyone who might have been involved in the decision making of keeping Nowak, keeping the whole scandal quiet. Essentially, we have those recordings that we released in 2019. We have transcripts of those. If the state police are interested in that's all publicly available information. There was also incredible amount of documents that were taken from the Diocese of Buffalo, including talk within those documents of shredding materials. It really kind of astounded me that the DA's office or anyone, that there was never an attempt to go in and raid the Diocese of Buffalo, execute a search warrant at those offices, execute a search warrant if you need to at Terry Connors' law offices. Do something, and because even the Attorney General's report states they didn't provide all the documents to the state Attorney General. One of the things I also asked Burke, that Attorney General's settlement is looking pretty weak right now, isn't it? There was a priest monitoring program in that settlement, and that priest monitoring program, well, Jeffrey Nowak, if you read, there was a story in the Buffalo News today, Jake Jokes pointed this out, that the priest monitoring program didn't include Nowak, even though this guy was on administrative leave since 2019 for sexual related incidents. He was not part of this priest monitoring program. So why is that? Why was it that Catholics were able to, unknowingly, unbeknownst to them, their money is going to paying this guy who's, according to federal authorities, living in some sort of disgusting meth den, and ordering child pornography and distributing child pornography. It's very disturbing to a lot of Catholics whose hard-earned money is being put in the collection basket at a time when their churches are being closed, when they're fighting to keep these churches open. I see a comment here from Susan. It says, sadly, I believe it is high time for a criminal investigation. My Catholic heart hurts. And that's a sentiment here. I asked Burke, what are you hearing from your constituents as far as, they must be frustrated with this. And one of the things he brought up was there's been a lot of suicides in his community in South Buffalo. Been a lot of police suicides, been a lot of suicides in general. And there's, this isn't proven, but, reasonable people can speculate as to what was driving all that. Was there some sort of abuse of some of these people who took their own lives? We know that, unfortunately, that is a common thing with people who are sexually abused by priests and others. So I want to go back to next thing I want to show you here is I have a letter that Burke sent to Major Amy Faraletto, familiar name here, who's a troop commander at Troop A of New York State Police. He is asking that the state police serve as the primary liaison with federal authorities to ensure every credible lead is pursued and that no jurisdictional gaps prevent justice. Now, this is an important line here about the current regime here with the diocese. He says, while current diocesan leadership has sought to assure the public that it has corrected the failures it inherited, these recent events raise deeply troubling questions about whether warning signs continue to be missed, ignored, or inadequately investigated. Those questions deserve independent answers from law enforcement, not internal assurances from the institution itself. It also says that, that when it comes to the Diocese of Buffalo, this exposes a broader challenge confronting law enforcement. Unlike many organizations, Burke says, Catholic Church operates through a highly centralized administrative structure. This is very organized. And if there are crimes going on and it's in an organized fashion, you would think that someone like the state police would really have the resources and the wherewithal to do that. I hate to say this, but the Erie County District Attorney's Office mostly prosecuting street crimes. They're not doing many high-level investigations of this nature. Um, Now, he says here, for that reason, I urge the New York State Police to consider establishing a specialized investigative unit dedicated to institutional child sexual abuse and organize efforts to conceal it. Such a unit could coordinate investigations across jurisdictions, analyze institutional records, identify patterns, and work collaboratively with other law enforcement partners. Institutional child sexual abuse deserves that same level of expertise, coordination, and commitment. This is important too. He goes on to say that this is not just about the Catholic Church. He says um, it's not just about religious institutions. He said, tragically, these crimes have occurred within religious organizations of many faiths, as well as nonprofit organizations, governmental entities, private institutions entrusted with the care of children. He said any specialized investigative unit should have broad authority to look at these other institutions as well. It's the Jeffrey Epsteins of the world. Many institutions here in the last 10 years or so that have been exposed to have concealed and in many cases allowed child sexual abuse. And he wants to give the state police carte blanche to do that. He says he has had initial conversations with them. So this isn't just a politician calling for something without really doing his research. He said he's had initial conversations with them. And, I'm sure Governor Hochul is going to be contacted in the next few days by media, seeing what she thinks about this. I just want to read this last sentence here because I think it's important in his letter here. He says, every survivor deserves to know that every credible report will be thoroughly investigated and that anyone who committed crimes or knowingly enabled or concealed them will be held criminally accountable. The diocese's history, institutional complexity, and statewide reach make this precisely the type of investigation that benefits from the experience and independence of the New York State Police. If he then goes on to say that if additional personnel, statutory authority, or legislation is needed, I will help secure those resources to do that. The last sentence here of his letter to the state police says, for too many survivors, justice has been delayed for decades. They should not be asked to wait any longer. I see here Kevin Kay, who's a survivor of abuse here, commenting on this live video saying, this shouldn't have taken this long for everyone to finally stand up and do these investigations. You know what, Kevin, you're absolutely right. This stuff was exposed 7 years ago, and yet people like Bishop Malone are still in Buffalo. They're essentially just sitting there, retired, again, collecting paychecks. We've seen some turnover when it comes to the Diocese of Buffalo and as far as the administrators. But I can tell you from my experiences reporting on the diocese, this is a highly dysfunctional organization. And even if they had wanted to prioritize, monitoring someone like Jeffrey Nowak, you do wonder if they would have been able to even do that. It's the idea that whether it comes to, cops, whether it comes to police, the idea of policing yourself doesn't generally work. You need an outside entity to come in and look at things. And that's what Assemblyman Burke is really calling for right now. Kevin goes on to say here, this should have taken long. This should have politicians, parishioners, and the public. Survivors have been telling everyone about this for years. And Kevin, you're absolutely right again. And this is something that I don't know why it took this long. I don't know why it took another 7 years, but it's that 7-year gap that people are pointing to now as proof that, hey, you haven't reformed yourself. You've had a civil settlement with the Attorney General. Okay, that settlement isn't looking very strong right now, considering that the priest can just go and, while he's on the payroll, be accessing child sexual abuse materials, child pornography, and saying some really disturbing things. Now, the diocese, to this point, has said that it now is going to try to remove Nowak canonically and get him defrocked. But the big question, why did it take so long? I've been going through Catholic Church canon law. Lucky me, over the last few days, and I think that there's reasonable ways that they could have removed him from ministry. I'm going to write about that, a little more about that in the coming weeks. But just wanted to get you this update. I'm going to have a written report later about this, and as well as share some video with you from Assemblyman Burke, and of course, a response from the diocese. Thanks for tuning in.